Is this 20?
Hello. Yeah. So we are recording. Did you get it? Did you get the notification?
I did. The nice lady told me. Yeah, right. We were laughing as we came on just because I never ever remember what episode number we're on, and I don't know if that's just like a stupid Disbrain thing or if that's just like we're that unorganized. But are we on episode 20?
No, we're on episode 18.
Is that true?
Yes, it's true.
Is that true? Great.
I promise
whatever
you.
Episode we're on.
Yeah, this is episode 18, The Dichotomy.
Yeah, that's our titular lyric for the week, too. The Dichotomy, which is not technically a lyric, it's a title, but it's by Bad Religion, and they're a punk band, and it's a loophole, and we win. I guess you can comment on it if you're mad at us for that. I don't know.
Yeah, totally. I'm having issues finding the song on Spotify, but I will do my best to post it to the playlist.
Yeah, I read the lyrics to it yesterday, and it has all of like 3 or 4 sentences in it. So
yeah, it's really short. I was like, where are the rest of the verses?
Yeah.
And you're like, no, this is it. It was 1983. Welcome.
Yeah, 1983, before that fancy PhD.
Yeah. Go, Greg. And then also before we pressed the record button, we were talking about, okay, so I'm Al.
I'm Diz.
Yay. And
Yay.
A couple of cool things happened I think I want to talk about before we revisit email.
Yeah, you wouldn't even tell me, so I want to know about the cool things.
Oh, really? Oh, those are different. Those are personal. This is that we have over 1,000 plays and like 550 followers on our Instagram.
That's fucking crazy.
Yeah, I just decided to check today because I haven't checked in forever. Thank you to everyone in our audience, which is now comprised of non-binary and some other kinds of folks.
It's comprised of all the folks.
It is. It's finally comprised of all the folks. And so I don't know when that happened, but just that's really cool that our listenership is, even though it's still mostly male dominated. Hi, men. It's very unexpected and awesome.
Yeah, that is really unexpected. Thanks for listening, dudes.
Yeah, we appreciate it. I'm like, are you picturing our boobs when you do this? Like, try not to do that.
I have good news for you. There's not, between Alicia and I, there's maybe 3 boobs. Alicia has 2 boobs and I have maybe 1 boob collectively. So if you like Total Recall, you should just picture the alien lady from Total Recall.
Sweet, I like that. Well, this took a turn. But yeah, that's about the good news about our listenership. Just thank you for listening and thank you for following us on Instagram and stuff. Before we popped on, though, we were having this discussion about like professionalism and like modes of communication. And Diz was like, maybe we should put this on the podcast. And that's when I was like, cool, let's do it. And then we pushed record.
Yeah. Basically bitching about all you youngsters out there in your text messages.
Yeah. So when I was an advisor for a club and one of the officers was like, let me get your number so I can text you. And I was like, that's a boundary. I don't know. You're not supposed to have your professor's numbers. I know that the cool, in quotes, professors are like, let's hang out. But there's so much ethically wrong with that to me. Like, you're their supervisor. There's an age difference. You have power over them. And yeah, so I don't really think that's a cool thing to do unless it's like, you know, one-off parties. Like I had this professor who would do end of the year parties because she would host international students and then just invite everyone to her classes. But like grades have already been submitted, right? So there's no penalty for not going. And just because I'm weird about boundaries, I like never went. But I don't mind that. And I am kind of getting used to the idea of like labs going out for drinks occasionally. Like a lab is, so there's a research advisor, which is like a general professor. And then they oversee like postdoctoral students, master students, doctoral students, and sometimes undergrads. And like sometimes those whole labs will go out to like drink or something, play darts. I don't know. And so like that is a little more comfortable, but my favorite is like our doctoral program would just have once a month event. And so all of the students and all of the faculty would go one day after class to the bar. And the first round of drinks was always on the program chair. So that was just really nice because there's no pressure. Not everyone goes, you know, like you don't feel like you have to go, but it's nice to have a social thing.
Yeah. Yeah. I hate text messages. I was just saying I hate text messages on like a professional basis because, well, one, I'm a writer, so like the lack of grammar and punctuation and all of those things just fucking kills me. But like, two, people don't compartmentalize their thoughts. And so you get like a text message that says, hi, and like another one that says, how are you? And like another one that says some other fucking arbitrary thing where it's like, this could all be one sentence, I feel like, you know what I mean? And so I have really big issues. More than anything, I hate fucking group text messages. And people put me in those all the time. And it's like literally the number one way to make me fucking hate you. But yeah, anyway, moving on from media issues, I guess.
If you want to reach us, email is the best, basically, or a phone call if it's professional.
Yeah. But you have to ask for that. Don't go looking for those. How are you doing? How are you doing this week?
I'm pretty good. So I got in my test scores for my autism and ADHD assessment. And it was just really weird because I like excel at a lot of things to get in all of these scores that were like below average and, you know, severe was one of the ratings. Like I have something I do is severely bad. And so that was just a little uncomfortable. And I guess a lot of people, when they get these results, they feel like infantilized, you know, or like disparaged against or like talked down to, because it is like stuff that feels really basic. Like it's stuff like social awareness and social cognition. Social cognition and social awareness are my moderate to severe ones. And then, you know, I have deficiencies in reciprocal social behavior. So like if someone does something, I don't automatically know how to respond unless there's like a script, you know? So just getting all of these things that are like below average, severe stuff, I don't know. It was just really jarring, but I didn't feel infantilized. And we talked about a lot of tips like to help me moving forward, like what I should be focusing on. And so all of that is really good stuff. I do present as having both autism and ADHD, which explains a lot of like this, why some things don't bother me that should, or, you know, whatever. I don't know. I guess I present typically, which again is another, like, I don't feel typical, but it's fine. And then one thing I do excel at, though, is planning.
You sure do. Yeah.
So that feels good. Yeah, my week has been going pretty good. One of the strategies I've been trying to employ is to look at my week as a week, and I have to give myself a buffer before and after things and set different alarms. I haven't done that yet, but it's just been a whole new world trying to manage this stuff.
Sure, that makes sense. I mean, I don't know if it's like necessarily life-changing because like your behavior and like everything is basically still the same except like this knowledge that you have now. But like, I think that it is, I mean, I guess it would make me feel different to know. I guess that's like the whole point in seeking assessment. That's an interesting topic, actually. Like, do you act differently once you learn truths about things? That's a whole different philosophy discussion for another time.
Yeah, I mean, just as a weird little, I mean, like, know better, do better is kind of like a good motto. So I kind of feel like, yeah.
Yeah, I guess so. I guess I kind of like look at it more in like this element of like, if somebody you love did something bad to you, like, and it would change the way that you thought about it, like, or about them, would you like even want to know about it, you know, kind of thing. And like, I mean, I feel like the truth is always the right path to go down, but like I also think a lot of people would disagree on that based on like the fact that like emotions, actions, all of those things are like temporary and like fleeting. So like you can change from like moment to moment and be different people, you know. So I don't know, there's a lot of like philosophical debate to be had there, and like human nature and the human condition and blah blah blah. But that's not today's show.
No, it's not, but I do have that written down so we can revisit it later. How are you doing this week?
Fuck. This week has just been, I don't know, a goddamn roller coaster. I got really sad for a minute because there's one thing that I can't stand in life. Like my ultimate fucking just like ruin in life is feeling trapped. I can't stand to feel trapped. And like, I am an avid goer. I I almost never ever live in just one spot. I am always on the road, be it like just on this island that we live on, or like across the country, or like across the world. I'm always doing something. And the second that I feel trapped, life feels boring and worthless, and then I feel boring and worthless, and then the whole like spectrum of emotions like comes down about like, what am I doing with my life? Like, am I wasting my fucking time? So I had that happen to me like over the last couple weeks, and I am like a really big fan of the concept of like fixing your problems by identifying like the X factor, and then realizing that like, you know, kind of like taking it step by step down like the rungs of the ladder that led you to like this fucking skyscraper of like an issue that you have, you know, because 99.9% of the times like we'll create problems by ignoring them, and then all of these other problems happen as a direct result of that one problem, and all we do is try to fix all of these problems that surround this one problem, and nothing changes because those problems aren't the X factor, you know. And so like that is a lot of like what I had to do this week to try to figure out like where the fuck my brain is at. I think I have, so now I feel much happier. It also just resulted in me like booking another trip to like leave again. And it was funny because my friend Jazz that I was talking to her the other day, and she was like, how long have you been on the island? Have you been on the island for more than a month this year? And I was like, I think so.
Yeah. The whole year? Yeah. You've been here for more than a month.
Yeah. It doesn't feel like it sometimes, but mental health is important, and you have to like realize like the things that you need to like keep yourself mentally healthy, and like my ability to go is just one of those things. And so like I need to embrace that and do what, you know, feels natural for me. So yeah, that's been my week. A lot of existentialism, and then a lot of like, I don't know, comeuppance or something.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Something that you were talking about really resonated with me, and you were talking about the X factor. And so I look at it in terms of like symptoms and causes. Like it's like you're trying to treat all the symptoms and make the symptoms better, but you haven't yet found the cause. You know, and so it sounds like you've identified the cause that are working toward changing that, which is super cool.
Yeah, I mean, stay tuned. It's going to be a bumpy road, I'm sure. Like, the whole point of me leaving right now is that I feel like a bunch of pieces are going to fall, and the best way for me to handle it is to step back and just let them do it, and then deal with the aftermath of that instead of like staying here and trying to keep them suspended. You know what I mean? So that's kind of like what I've been working with this week. It's a whole lot of like, I feel bad for my partner, honestly.
Yeah, he's so chill and patient and like really, I don't know, he's really cool. It would be interesting to do like an episode with our partners one time.
Oh yeah, I mean, I would love to do it. I don't think that he would be into it at all, though. He's so like he's like a fucking fence post when it comes to like emotions or like, and it's funny because he's like, you know, he really likes performing and stuff. Like he's like a musician and like he doesn't mind being like the public eye and stuff, but like at the same time he's like very, very arm's length with like everything and like is so goddamn analytical. He's like talking to a robot sometimes and it's just insane. But he's very smart and he's very mild mannered and
he's super nice and cool and like really like a good friend.
Yeah, dude, particularly to your mister.
He's really supportive.
They're really adorable together.
They are. It's really cute. And they were friends before we were friends, so that just worked out nicely.
Yeah, and me and Shaggy were friends before any of us were friends, and it's crazy how life works like that.
I know, that's so crazy.
Anyway, land acknowledgement. We are on native land. We are on stolen native land.
Our full land acknowledgement can be found on our website, which talks about our reflexivity and positionality in relation to the land.
And if you guys are listening for the first time, we're on the big island of Hawaii, so surprise.
Yes.
Any current events you want to discuss today?
Yeah, current events. So primary voting is happening in our state right now. So if you happen to be on the Big Island, which some of our listenership are on the Big Island, make sure you got your ballots, fill them out and complete them. Those are due August 4th. That's where your vote really matters, especially with this rising conservative party in our state of Hawaii. So that's the first thing. And I talked briefly about this army. They call themselves an army. It's these people. They kind of moved into this land in Kunia on Oahu, and they got arrested because they wouldn't get off the land. So previous time I brought this up, the article was talking about just like what they're doing there. And so now they're kind of playing up their story on social media, which who knows how closely aligned to the truth it is, but like it's really affecting, you know, how people see their cause. So they're presenting themselves as these inheritors of this land they illegally occupied, which is a cannabis farm, I think, for medical marijuana, but they're not. There's no proof like to this claim at all. And it's just really interesting to see how just, you know, people who followed their side of the story, just like with anything without having all of the information, tend to be really swayed to this sympathetic story, especially with other land shit that went on recently, like with Mark Zuckerberg trying to pay off the people who were stewards of the land that he bought.
Yeah, fucking dickhead.
Yeah. And they're like, no, that's not the point. Just we still need access. So they're trying to go that route with it, but there's no proof that any of them are actually like inheritors of this land. And they've been asked to try to present this case. So it's just very interesting.
Yeah, it is worth mentioning, I guess, to anybody who listens that is definitely not from the state of Hawaii or doesn't have any information on how the like state of Hawaii works. So the individual islands that make up the archipelago are mostly public, but 2 of the islands are actually private. And that's insane. They were just bought a long time ago, and they're still owned by like the same rich families. It's illegal to step foot onto the land beyond 25 feet onto the coast, I think, or something like that. The coast in Hawaii cannot be owned on any of the islands, so that's why that beach law stands. But all the land inward, and they just have people fucking patrolling, which is like gross. Also, Mark Zuckerberg, what we're talking about there, if you guys are unaware of that, is the fact that Mark Zuckerberg is essentially trying to buy Kauai. And people are fucking pissed about it because, you know, no, sir, get the fuck out of here. But he just keeps acquiring properties that are stewarded. So land stewardship means that the land has fallen into a trust and it is being looked over by somebody appointed by that trust. And it's either a trust through family lineage or it's a trust through some other kind of monetary transaction. But the point is that a lot of this stewarded land is being kept as native land for a reason, as conservatorships for the state of Hawaii. And so Mark Zuckerberg trying to buy that to build himself some kind of Hawaii surf palace is fucking crazy.
The Ni'ihau is totally private. No one can go to Ni'ihau. It's owned by a family.
Yeah.
And they speak a different dialect of Hawaiian too.
I think it might be true about Lanai too, where like most of the island is like fucking whatever.
Some dude did own it and sell it, which I thought was weird. Land stewardship, it's a thing.
Yeah, and it's something to be respected. Let's put it that way. Especially if that land is being stewarded for conservation effort. I guess I'll bring in the good news for the week, pulled from the Good News Hub.
Yay!
I guess this week's article by Victoria Pressler was released July 28th, 2022. The Ancient Tree Archive is cloning the world's oldest trees to try to fight climate change. 130 species of trees have been cloned so far. Redwoods are one of the most cloned trees, with 15,000 of the giant trees growing at Archangel's facility in Kopmish. They describe this as creating a living library of old growth trees, which is fucking beautiful.
Yeah, that's actually the word I was going to use. That's beautiful.
It's really beautiful. And, you know, especially if you're not aware of this, almost 80% of the world's old growth forests have been completely cut down. A lot of these tree species are invaluable, you know what I mean, for supplying oxygen to the planet, as well as keeping terrain intact and all sorts of things. So it's really important to care about trees, and it's really nice that we have found something beyond the seed vault to keep that effort going.
Yeah, so one very weirdly interesting tie-in is that one of my very first published articles was on the importance of soil seed banks, which instead of doing this with old trees, does it with like seeds, right? So there are different seed archives around the world, and they're used in case, you know, of super climate disaster or whatever, and just talks about the importance of like why we need seed collection, and to see like, you know, that we also need to preserve these ancient trees. Like really nice bookend on how important, you know, plants are, I guess.
Yeah. Rewilding efforts. I've mentioned it before. I'll mention it again. Rewilding efforts are fucking amazing. And if you guys are more interested in that, please just look up the term rewilding and you'll find a whole world about the cool science of rewilding.
That's really awesome.
Yeah.
There is an island actually called Nauru, which I read about in one of my classes, and I was like, why the fuck are we reading about this stupid island? Like, and it's not stupid, I apologize. I was very young and dumb, and I was like, why am I learning about this? And then literally less than 6 months later, I met a couple from Nauru, and what Nauru did was they had identified a market for their trees and land, and they just like deforested everything. They sold everything, and now they have like nothing. And they're also working on like, okay, how do we reforest this? I mean, for a little bit, they were doing like illegal passport sales, you know, like you yeah,
that's true.
And so they got in trouble for that because you can't make illegal passports, but that was their primary source of income for a while. But Nauru is a really cool place also in like working on reforestation.
Awesome. I don't have much of a segue into our topic today, but I guess what we're talking about today is dichotomies. Essentially, I think the way that this applies most is that punk rock cultures, we like to talk about, or like we like to focus on punk rock in an evolving world. And we mentioned about how this is an ongoing and ever-changing like strategy, like what it's like to uphold like a punk rock ethos, a mentality, like action and cause, and all of those things in a world that keeps fucking pulling the rug out from under you. And the adaptability of like the, you know, punk rock culture and spirit. But we at some point hit a really interesting kind of like juncture in the road. Being a professional and being a punk kind of have become the same thing, depending on what your, you know, field is. But like in the beginning of punk rock, that was definitely not the case, right? Is this making sense?
I think I'm following. Like, okay, so this kind of relates back to our punk rock ethos and professionalism episode. I think that was episode 5 or something, right? And we were talking about, okay, how do we bring that burn it to the ground, fucking watch it all die, crush the systems mentality into our work? Is that where you're going with that? Like,
yeah, so I think it's really interesting. As an example, I have so many friends now who grew up with that same kind of attitude, that same kind of etiquette, that perception of the world, you know, that everything is fucked and what's the point, and like that kind of celebrated apathy that I think so much of punk rock culture, particularly through like the 70s and 80s, were really fond of expressing. I also have so many friends now that have taken that same thing that in youth made them gravitate towards that. You know, I think, and it's because you're smart enough to realize that the world is fucked up. That you know, when you start to understand, when you start to be able to conceptualize like the world around you at a certain age, I think it just does feel hopeless, but this same mentality seems to also build the people who are willing to work the hardest to change it. And so I think the stereotype on punk rock is fuck it all, destroy everything. But what punk rock is really evolving into is like very carefully crafted and like hardworking solutions to like trying to build a better tomorrow.
Yeah, especially when we look at the things like the ethos that and ideologies that are generally thought of as punk rock or maintained in the punk rock culture as it is today include things like being anti-sexist, racist, fascist, preserving and amplifying indigenous voices, still being anti-capitalism and anti-consumerism, but instead of burning all the systems to the ground, it's more about like, how can we work within systems to change them so that more people are represented and like the earth is preserved? Because so far it's still our only home. So
right. Yeah. And I do want to point out that this, you know, that kind of apathy that you feel as a teenager and all of that angst that drives you to say things like fuck everything, fuck society, fuck the system, all of that is just learned helplessness that, you know, happens in so many other places in your life. But
what is learned helplessness?
So learned helplessness is basically the concept of thinking that because something is out of your control, you don't have any power to change it. Thinking that because something seems much bigger than you means that it is so much bigger than you. And we do this with things like voting. Human beings are remarkable with learned helplessness. Any subject that feels overwhelming is overwhelming because we tell ourselves it's overwhelming. You know what I mean? The idea that we can't change things because we were told the world just doesn't work like that.
That makes a lot of sense. So one of the aspects for my metric for evaluating the people that were like participants in my doctoral research was this thing called Rotter's locus of control. And so there's this internal locus, which so it just basically is like, where does control lie? So there's internal and external. And internal means that you believe that you have the power to change things. And external means that you believe that you are powerless to change things. It really does align with like learned helplessness. And we thought there was going to be like some sort of correlation with either religiosity, which is like the amount that like being religious plays in your life, or actual religion. And I can't remember if it does or not. But the things that determine, you know, whether you have control or not. What's interesting about learned helplessness from my perspective about us is that when we were growing up in our punk rock communities, learned helplessness wasn't necessarily a thing, right? We had talked about how, okay, not only was it like we are powerless to stop this, but like, what are we going to do to try to fix it? Or what are we going to do differently? Like, how are we going to impact the outcome in some way? Like, yeah,
I don't know. I mean, I would say that it's kind of a toss up in the punk rock scene, you know, because there is a very like idealistic, very like forward thinking side to punk rock. And then there's also a very self-destructive, very narrow-minded side to punk rock.
Yeah, I'm gonna light a match and burn it to the ground and then watch the flames.
Well, I think that, we've expressed this before, but like hearing the like sing-song punk rock song, the whole fuck authority, fuck society, like, I don't know, that whole song and dance, is just so ridiculous, because like what you're doing there is you are essentially putting out like half ideas. Like you're saying like fuck society. Okay, sure. But like, what are you doing differently? You know what I mean? Or like, and then even things like saying like, we have to rise up. Well, like, okay, but that's basically where the buck stops, right? Because like, in what way are you going to do that? And so I think that's the interesting place where like that divergence in the road happens between, and that's like where the dichotomy gets created between being a punk rocker and being like somebody who's professionally working in a field to try to make changes happen.
Yeah, I can definitely see that. And there is a lot of us versus them too. Like, well, if I'm punk, I can't be a professional, which we talked about. That's the evolving world part, right? Is that no, you can be both and you should be both and you should carry that spirit like into what you do.
Yeah, I think one really damning thing about especially like mainstream punk rock culture is that it really teaches that us and them kind of mentality, but it also really teaches you that like failing to live within society makes you alternative. You know what I mean? Or like it's something to strive for. But like the silly thing about it is like you do not live outside of society. You are a social animal. You are a human being. You know what I mean? So like that's not to say that there's not exceptions to the rule. There's exceptions to every rule. But my point is that like for you to say something like fuck society is silly, because society isn't just this like us and them picture that they paint. Like it's not like, it's like a good example is like the way that the right talks about Antifa, right? Like Antifa is this big entity that's like super organized and like they have a president, and like, when they say things like tell Antifa to stop doing things, it's like, okay, well, what who would you like me to contact, right? Like,
I like that.
Yeah, it's very silly to just say like fuck society, because like what part of society? Because like is it the part of society that like creates punk rock culture and punk shows and all of those things, or is it like the part of society that like creates laws, but like at the same time, like are you going to call the cops if your car gets stolen, or like are you going to cash a welfare check, or like you know what I mean? So it's like you can't just look at like the world as one giant collective enemy that you're fighting against, or society, or the government even. You know what I mean? There's so many factors within these things, and so that is like where that old mentality of punk rock gets fucking stupid and thoughtless.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked before about like how we feel about like sure, you do you, right? And you can choose to waste your life and do nothing and just, be wasted. But what good does that really do anybody? And I feel like that wasted mentality and that fuck it all, maybe it is learned helplessness, or, what's interesting about punk is that it's presented as a choice. And not only is it presented as a choice, it's presented like being wasted, right, is presented as like a noble choice. Like by doing this, I'm saying fuck you to someone, but you're really not. You're only saying fuck you to yourself, which is like the lie. That is the lie.
Yeah. Like, I mean, it's really just establishing like your own like worst enemy as yourself. Like, and also like your perceptions, because like that exactly like what I was saying, like it's your perception of society that you are battling against, and like that means that it only goes as far as your understanding of society. So like you are creating the world that you hate by that notion. Like if you're not taking the time to learn about these things, if you're not taking the time to understand how the world works, or like systems work, or governments work, or society works, then you're ultimately condemning your own perceptions of a very, very like tip of the iceberg situation.
Yeah. And spoilers, for every time a system is taken down, there is another one that is put in its place. Like, there is no such thing as a systemless society. Like, every society is made up of systems. I had this really interesting, like, that kind of came to me in a sociology class, like when we were talking about food, because food preferences and food choices are shaped by, societal perceptions about like what are good practices and what do people need, as well as like, health and wellness, medical doctors, like our needs, what our actual needs are. And then like things like, fads like keto, paleo, hacking your macros, like that kind of stuff. So we can take all this information and internalize it personally. But there was this crazy thing that happened with GMOs in like the mid 2000s where people were all like anti-GMOs. GMOs, spoilers, are something that we all eat every day. A genetically modified organism happens in nature. That's called evolution. And really what people wanted to be against but weren't was corporations that regulated genetically modified seeds. So specifically Monsanto, right? They would put their farms next to these local farmers, right? Their seeds would blow over onto the farmer's land, and then Monsanto would sue the farmer. So it wasn't GMOs that were bad. It was these corporate practices that were bad. At the same time, we had the rise of this thing called organic food, and organic just means the quality of the soil that the food is grown in has like a certain nutrient composition. And at the time, like in Hawaii, like organic food wasn't like something people could really do without damaging like the natural ecosystem, because a lot of the nutrients that are in organic food, organic soil composition, weren't in Hawaii soil. So when we had, you could see the emergence of like, then people were putting like organic on their packages and understanding what that actually meant, is like only 70% of the food had to actually be organic. So like this organic system was getting ready to take over like this old system of like processed foods. And that's kind of like the world we live in now. Like organic is like a thing that people look for and prefer. And like, so this system was in place. It was building to overtake like this preservative enriched, I guess, food system.
Yeah, exactly. I think that is just like a really big, and that's exactly the same thing as like, I think what I like to think is kind of the old age of like punk rock mentality, right? Is like, you are only identifying something as far as you care to. Like you hate something that you don't understand, or like you're fighting against something that you don't understand, well, then you're not really fighting against anything at all. And so like people who are like, fuck GMOs is like, well, no, GMOs are important though, because like, even with like GMO technology that is arising in the modern day, like we're learning how to grow crops in fucking nations and, for populace that can't grow crops, or like, we're learning how to make crops more sustainable. We're learning how to make some animals more like adaptable to certain climates. Like these are all things that are very valuable. So saying fuck GMOs is not really what you want to be saying. Like what you want to be saying is fuck Monsanto, fuck corporations, and like, sure, dude, yeah, like that is the problem that needs to be fixed, not GMOs, and it's the same thing. It's the exact same thing. Fuck the system. What part of the system? Fuck GMOs. What part of GMOs? Like you can't just have a catch-all for very gigantic things in the world.
Yeah.
And I think that is because punk rock was invented, or, I shouldn't say invented, but because punk rock arose out of like teenage angst. I think that is why that mentality was so easy to like build upon and like to spread, throughout punk rock culture, was because like, yeah, I'm a teenager and I say fuck society, and like that's all I need to say. I'm a teenager, and then every other teenager who hears that feels somewhat idealistic only has to identify with that. And so we spent the last few episodes talking a lot about, punk rock's past. And so like, I think this dichotomy is really talking about like the future of punk rock and like what needs to happen in like punk rock culture to survive this evolving world. And what, I think one of the biggest things is that like, it's not enough to just be a punk anymore. Like you actually have to live for a cause. Like fuck society isn't enough, you know? And like it's actually damning altogether to living at all. Like if you're going to be, and don't get me wrong, if you're going to do like the anarchist thing and you're going to actually do it, like you're going to move out to the middle of the fucking woods and you're going to kill all your own food and you're going to fucking make all your own clothes and you're going to do the damn thing, dude. Like, fuck yeah, do it. That's amazing. You're a better man than I. Most people who identify as anarchists don't do that.
No.
Then by
and have no intention of ever doing all of that.
Exactly. So like, I'm sorry to anybody who would find this contrary, but like, if you're living within this society, if you have a bank account, if you drive a car, if you're doing like these things, like you are not an anarchist. And so like, that's up to you to like identify as whatever you want. But like, I'm just telling you that like, by definition, that is not what that is. And I think that is another thing in punk rock culture that we really have to start dissecting, you know, is like, because we kind of shit all over what actual anarchists do by like watering down those efforts to be like, oh, I just don't like corporations, I'm an anarchist, right? So like, there are all of these conversations that need to be had. And I think like it's funny to take punk rock in that direction too, as a dichotomy, because like as a punk rocker who's going to be like, oh, wasted youth, and like I'm just going to drink 40s all day and fucking get drunk at bars and blah, blah, blah. Like that in itself is not an anarchist perception. So like you're not evolving with like the world, and like you're also not being an anarchist. Like what are you doing anymore?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think what's interesting, and I hope one day to meet an anarchist, like an actual anarchist, so we can talk with them about like what it actually involves and entails and stuff. Because whenever I would meet anarchists in quotes, you know, it's like, okay, so you don't want any government. Like, what does that mean? What does that look like? Who manages education? Who, like, because at some point there is going to be a structure in place, right? Even if there is no structure, people will create their own hierarchies and systems of power, because that's what people do. And most people are followers and they want to defer to a leader, you know? So then, like, what does it just become a popularity contest? And I'm sorry if this is not in any way reflective of what anarchists actually believe, but the people that I talk to have a very challenging time, like, addressing those kinds of simple questions, because, you know, libertarian, I guess, is the closest political ideology to that. Like, there is still like a structure of power in place, but loosely everyone is just in charge of their own shit and they can manage whatever they want on their own. And
right.
That's like the closest that I can approximate. But if someone wrongs you, there will be a system of punishments in place that the community will collectively come up with, right? Because no one is going to tolerate being stolen from just because we're all anarchists.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, and you know, this concept isn't new in the world. Like, it's not like it's just because the emergence of giant corporations and all of these things that like the concept of like anarchy or like the concept of all of these things were invented. In 700 years ago, Sir Thomas More wrote the book Utopia that addresses exactly what an anarchic society would essentially function as. And since that book was written 700 years ago, there have been tons of attempts to make utopian societies based on what seems like a foolproof system, but they never work, do they? Because people don't work like that.
No.
And that's the same reason like communism is really interesting, right? Because like communism in itself like sounds like it could be pretty chill if it didn't always end in a terrible dictatorship, because mankind is just a crazy power struggle. Let's put it that way. You know what I mean? Like it's that truly is like the human condition, I think, is just to be in a constant power struggle or control struggle, I should say. And like, you know, so I think the smartest thing to do and like the biggest act of rebellion now is to learn how these systems work and to involve yourself in them enough to start like pointing out why they don't work, you know, and educate yourself and be productive in your complaints.
Yeah. Also, not just pointing out why they don't work, but help contribute to the solutions to fix them, right? So we often talk about like the causes that we have chosen, right? Clearly, as we're talking about the system and we're like, what part of the system? Like, we've acknowledged the system is too big and there's whatever system it is, like all the systems are way too big. So you pick your one little area and like how, you know, not only identifying the issues, but then like also working on whatever you feel like the appropriate solutions are. So I have a question for you, actually. You said some language, and so I'm just assuming that you have the same answer that I do, but I want to ask you to clarify. Do you think more change can be affected inside or outside systems?
I think that more change can be affected inside of systems. I think that change gets developed outside of systems. Like the ideas for change obviously will get developed outside of systems because you need to be able to stand back and look at a picture as a whole. You can't be inside of something and recognize all of its working parts, right? So I think that, but like to change something, you have to be inside of that system. You know, it is, I would say, like, think of it as looking at a clock that doesn't work. From the outside, you can see that the clock doesn't work and you can take it apart and you can see all the different, you know, gears and toggles that make a fucking clock work. But like when you're inside of the clock, like you might know that it doesn't work, but it looks really big and overwhelming. You know what I mean? Pieces look like vast, and you know, so it's like conceptually, like you have to be outside of anything to see it for what it is.
I agree with that. The outside is where you see what's broken, but then from the inside is where you affect the most change. I don't think you can truly affect meaningful change from the outside. And I think that's just because the way systems work, right? Like that you have to have this whole like vetting process for who is considered, no matter what the system is, there is a vetting process for who is a voice of authority or who is a trusted voice in the system, right? You can't develop that trust outside the system. Like the system has to in some way trust you in order to affect change inside it. And the system is going to exist no matter what. Like you can stand outside the system and yell at it all you want. Like you need to change, you need to change. No one is going to listen to you or care. You have to be inside the system and take meaningful steps toward changing it. I think the only way to do that is from the inside. And I know that some people disagree. That's been my experience and understanding of like many different kinds of systems. And often where I run into this as a personal conflict is like, okay, so why didn't you ever go into politics? And that's like, I don't even want to fuck with that system, but it's a system that needs so much like change and maintenance. But it's one that I'm not willing to like participate in. I don't want to help people govern themselves, which is mostly what politics is, I think. And I do have some friends that after the 2016 election did go into politics. And I'm like, fuck yeah, rock on, like change the fucking system, like in whatever way you can. And like one thing too is living in Hawaii makes it really hard to want to do politics because most of the people who are politicians already reflect my ideals. So I don't have to worry about them speaking on my behalf, I guess. Why didn't you ever go into politics?
Yeah, the same reason I didn't finish high school. You know, I mean, like, I don't deny that these things are important. Politics, education, all of these things. But I can say that, like, as somebody standing on the outside of these two things, that was a broken clock I don't fucking have the tools to fix, like as a human being. You know what I mean? I don't have the mental capacity to do that. I don't have the inherent traits that make me that kind of person. And it was like the same thing with school. Like the educational system here was such bullshit when I was in school, you know, and it was like at some point, like, you just have to realize that, like, you're not that kind of animal, you know? And so that is exactly how I feel about politics. Like, I'm just not that kind of animal, you know? And I think I want to speak to something that you said about, like, you know, systems, like, have to be changed from the inside because they're made up of people, right? So, like, the idea that a system can change from the outside is like the same thing as, like, saying, like, you can destroy the church by burning down a church. Like, it doesn't fucking destroy the church. Like, it fucking ruins, like, some people's day for sure. You know what I mean? But, like, you didn't kill the church. You know what I mean? So, like, for people who assume that, like, things do change that way, that's to assume that, like, the system in itself is, like, brick and mortar, and that's not the way that it works. And Crass actually, like, has a really good lyric about that just directly says systems aren't just made of bricks, they're mostly made of people, right? And so, like, people are interesting though, because unlike brick and mortar, people are malleable. And that's why doing work within systems is the only thing that makes sense. If systems were brick and mortar, then they would be, you know, well, they wouldn't be fucking malleable for sure, but, like, they would also be a lot easier to destroy. But in that sense, like, then wouldn't be problematic, right? You could just constantly be destroying people's systems.
Yeah.
Which I guess, like, you know, is every youth's fantasy when they think about, you know, throwing a Molotov cocktail through a fucking Starbucks window, you know, like you guys didn't, you didn't fucking take down Starbucks, you know, you ruined somebody's fucking workday, like, for sure, you know, you, like, caused a lot of people a lot of headache, you fucking, but, like, that's another thing though, is, like, society isn't brick and mortar, and that's, like, the worst part, is the way that we view society from that super, like, primal kind of teenage angsty punk rock mentality. Society is made of people, and your people, the people you love, you know what I mean? And, like, it's an insane cognitive dissonance to be able to separate, like, yourself and, like, create this, like, us and them kind of situation, because, like, that's just not ever how it works. Like I said, like, you want to fucking fuck up a Starbucks, like, well, you didn't fuck up Starbucks, did you? You just fucked up everything for all the people that work there. Like, now some people are fucking not getting paid. Now some people, like, and so you can't conceptualize these things like they're inanimate, basically.
Yeah, the rough part about that too is, like, it's not like they're going to get insurance and they're going to be able to rebuild, because what you did was you committed a crime, and guess what? You could be prosecuted for committing that crime no matter what the message or intent was supposed to be behind it. Like, because that's how society works. And we are a society of people. Yeah. And you didn't impact any of the other Starbuckses, you know, let alone Starbucks as a whole. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, and that's not to say, like, that fighting doesn't work, right? Like, challenging systems doesn't work. Like, there's definitely amazing things that have happened by, you know, protests and movements, and that's, but, like, it is to say that, like, I guess what we're trying to express here more than anything is that if you don't have an inherent understanding of your enemy, then you don't actually have an enemy.
Yeah.
You have ignorance, which then is your enemy. And that is where this dichotomous, like I want to bring it back to, like, this divergence of, like, punk rock past and future, I think is changing and, like, has to change, you know? Because in my mind, this is such an important kind of, like, the kind of person that gravitates toward punk rock, especially for, you know, this, like, passion or, like, this, like, want for, like, a better tomorrow. That kind of person is so crucial to the survival of the world, because that means that you care. And if you don't care, which is, like, the past of punk rock, of this apathy and all of these things, then, like, you need to get out of the way. And you can keep all of that angst, and you can keep all of that mentality, and you can do all of those things, but, like, I think the most important thing is just to come to terms with the fact that like what you're doing is not rebellion. What you're doing is standing in one place.
Yeah, I can get behind that for sure. I think that's kind of a good place to leave it. What do you think?
Yeah, no, I don't know if I'm going to get a much clearer result out of what I was trying to say than that.
Yeah, I really like that. And it kind of aligns with some of our shout outs today. So we didn't even talk about how to work on like understanding, deprogramming, reprogramming your own head shit. But that's kind of the direction we were hoping to go in.
I am going to shout out Mark Manson's The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck, because I think that really beautifully speaks to like what we're saying here, like this apathy that like how we were saying, like, you know, saying fuck the system is only a baseline. It's not a solution. And so like when you hear that title, it sounds counterintuitive to what we're talking about, because not giving a fuck is in itself apathy. But the book is actually focused on how to turn problems in, like, everything is essentially going to be a problem no matter what, because that is the human condition. But like it's how to navigate like what matters and what doesn't, and how to make changes based on what matters and what doesn't.
Yeah, I think that's a really good shout out. I want to shout out the song I Was a Teenage Anarchist by Against Me.
Yeah, that's a good one.
It's so good. I don't know why I didn't come up with it, but you know, it's about like literally the chorus is, do you remember when you were young and you wanted to set the world on fire? And like, you know, just how changes happen. And I think it dwells a little bit more on the apathetic side than I would like, especially like we're talking about evolving, but there are other songs that they write that talk about evolving and everything. So I think that's a good one, just a band shout out. And if we haven't, I don't think we shouted out Against Me before. So just wanted to put that on our playlist. And then for like organizations and stuff, I don't think I have anything for this week. I want to table the one that I had for when we do talk about, you know, all those tips for reprogramming your own programming.
Yeah, I think I want to shout out Kara Lowenthal's Unfuck Your Brain podcast for anybody, particularly women, because she's like a really awesome feminist. It's called Unfuck Your Brain, and Kara Lowenthal teaches you practical solutions to rethink your issues and your everyday problems and turn them into like practical and manageable solutions. If anybody is needing some of that in their life, it's a really great resource. Sometimes I feel like when I listen to it, it's like, I can't believe this shit is free because it's like therapy. But I don't have to talk to anybody, and I like that.
Nice. Then there's a house version of that, which is called Unfuck Your Habitat. And Unfuck Your Habitat gives you tips and hacks for how to undo like the clutter in your life and the thoughts you have around things. It's like Marie Kondo for people who aren't into Marie Kondo, I guess. But it's also not Marie Kondo. Like it gives you these really practical, manageable, distillable like tips.
Cool. Yeah. And I guess I just want to end this whole episode by just saying like we are moving into like the reason that we wanted to talk about this dichotomy today is we're about to move into like a series of interviews, and I think that we're really just trying to showcase like the amazing work that people from punk rock scenes are doing in the world. So if you guys like this and you like this concept, then stay with us because we got a lot of cool stuff coming.
Yeah, we do. It's going to be amazing. Okay, well, thank you. And see you next time. Don't forget to, if you have any questions, you can email us at outonanaislandpodcast@gmail.com or follow us on Instagram at outonanaislandpodcast.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.